Hey everybody, Steve here, and today on The Buried Life, we're answering 10 questions. 10 questions about retiring overseas. And for all of those people that are considering on retiring overseas, much love going out to you all. Yeah, you like that little graphic thing? Definitely give it a thumbs up there. Yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of people that are not the boomers, but the Gen X, and I'm Gen X, I'm 57. So I'm kind of like right on the cusp between boomer and, or, the Gen X. But a lot of people are coming up on retirement, or they should be coming up on retirement. But the problem is there's too many expenses. It's too expensive to retire in the United States for the most part for average everyday working people. So, overseas retirement is definitely something to consider. So, we're going to go over 10 questions and we're going to answer some questions, some things that you might want to ask yourself in regards to overseas retirement, things that you see the resorts and how much a beer costs and things like that. But there's a lot more that comes into play. The devil is in the details when we're talking about retiring overseas, especially if it's going to be long term. So, yeah, we're going to get into this and we're going to get into these questions. And let's see what to look for when retiring overseas. Now, this is going to be kind of interesting. When choosing a country for an overseas retirement, what we want to look at are things like the cost of living expenses, food, groceries, medical, rent, buying property, so on and so forth. You want to look at healthcare. You want to look at the climate. You want to look for safety. Is the country that you're planning on retiring in, it might have cheap and inexpensive prices, but if there's high crime, that might be a deal killer for you. Other factors to consider are, residency requirements, access to facilities, social networks. Is there a group or a community of local expats that you can associate with, or do you not mind being the only round eye or foreigner in that entire area that you're at where you're going to retire? Also the language and so on and so forth. So, that's some other things to take into consideration when you're looking for retirement or what to consider. Let's see, let's go on to number two. What is the cost of living compared to where you're living? This is kind of a big one, and it's one that I've harped on a lot, and it was probably the main reason of why my wife and I, why we ended up retiring overseas. And the big thing was cost of living, the expenses. In the United States, expenses were really, really, really high, and they kept going up in such large increments every single year. Like, for example, property tax. Our property tax was going up $100 or more every single year. So eventually it got to the point of where you start to plan for retirement and you say, okay, well, my property tax is 2,000 or 2,500 a year, and I've got 10 more years of work or however many years of work, multiply that, the difference and kind of estimate how much your property tax is going to be 10 or 15 years down the road. And is that doable? Can you cover that with your retirement income, with your Social Security or your 401k or whatever retirement, I guess, investments that you have? And then also take into consideration your expenses of property upkeep. If you're renting or if you're buying a house, is your house going to be paid off in 10 years or 15 years or whatever? Or have you just bought a brand new house, and what are the expenses associated with that? Electricity, water, trash, garbage, trash and garbage, same thing, I guess. So there's gas, heat. All of these things in the United States had gone up exponentially, and especially even more so with the recession that we have going on, which it's strange because in the news, at least in American news media, we don't see a lot of press coverage of this. But even though prices have gone up between 25 and 40% for goods and services. So I think they're just they're kind of like the ostrich with their head in the sand. They don't want to, let's not talk about the problem that's going on, even though everybody's experiencing it. So the cost of living, and like I said in previous videos, you can go to Numbeo, Numbeo. I think that's the way you pronounce it. And on that website, you can get price comparisons for shopping and meals and alcohol and rent and utilities and phone service and internet and all of those things. And you can compare where you live with a place that you might want to retire overseas. And generally, the prices are within range. It's an acceptable range. Of course, it depends. Like, for example, here in Korea, the cost of rent in Seoul, Korea is going to be a lot higher than it would be in outlying cities that are not as prominent as Seoul. So, you need to take those things into consideration. But to get you within the ballpark, check out that website and you can compare the cost of living. And most of the times, pretty much every country that offers a retirement visa will be cheaper than the United States. So yeah, there's a lot of different options out there. And for many people just don't know. But yeah, once you start looking at those cost of living expenses, that light will click on and you'll think, maybe I can retire and maybe overseas is something that I want to do. Next one what are the healthcare options? In the United States, the healthcare options are a little bit different. The way they do their medical, how they pay for it. Like, for example, here in Korea, if you stay longer than 90 days, they will send you a letter and say, hey, you need to sign up for Korean National Health Insurance. And that will give you basic coverage for you and your family or you. And it's about $100, $110 a month, which isn't too bad. It's not there are some caps on what services you can get. There are some age requirements. So, for example, certain types of treatments or screening for things can only be done at certain ages and older. I'm not going to get into all that. And now if you want to do those tests early, you could pay for those out of pocket. But again, the prices for medical and healthcare in overseas countries is generally way less expensive than it is here in the United States. And when I say here in the United States, I'm not in the United States. I'm in Korea. For example, medications that would cost $200 and $300, like $10, $15 here in Korea. There's a medication that I'm on that was like $700 for a year, and it ends up it's maybe $35. Exact same medication, exact same name brand. So yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, the healthcare that comes across, what are the healthcare options in the country that you're looking at? So that's another question to ask. Let's take a look at number 4. What are the visa and residency requirements? People get all excited about retiring and so on and so forth overseas, and they think that, well, you just go to a country and boom, you can retire to any country in the world. That's not the case. Certain countries have visa or retirement visas or residency requirements associated with them that is easy and expat or retiree friendly. Other countries, not so much. For example, Korea. I'm retired in Korea, but Korea does not have a retirement visa. Now, they do have an investment visa where if you spend an obscene amount of money, like $1 million or something like that. I don't even know. Don't even quote me on that. But it's way more money that I will ever have. And so it's just not feasible for the everyday people like you and me. So other countries have retirement visas. And their retirement visas will have requirements of saying, you have to be within a certain age. You have to verify that you have income, a constant income or a certain amount of income each month, or a set amount of money that you deposit into their foreign bank, along with perhaps a monthly income or maybe one or the other. There are different requirements. So you need to take that into consideration. There were some people that contacted me that were like all excited. Oh, Steve, I'm going to retire here and blah, 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 blah. And then next thing you know, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to retire there because I just found out that it requires a lot more money than what I have in my portfolio. So yeah, it's kind of like you got to shop around and you got to look at the requirements in the different visas and how much the visas cost. How are the terms of the visas? Is it every year? Is it every 90 days? What are the requirements in regards to keeping it? Do you have to update your address every 90 days or every year? Is there a fee associated with renewing your visa? There's a lot of devil in the details types of things. And for somebody like us, and probably you should too, is to look at all the details so you can get all the numbers in and so you can make an informed decision so you know what you're getting into. Let's see, some other things. Definitely, you'll have to require a proof of income. That could mean, like for here in Korea or other places that will say, hey, we need to have your tax returns for the last 1, 2, or 3 years. We need to have a year or two worth of bank statements proving that you have the income source that you do. You might need to have a letter if you get a pension saying, hey, this person is receiving a pension of so-and-so amount this month, this for each month, and, as proof of income. There's a lot of different things like that. So yeah, proof of income, investments, and there's some other things as well. Because when we talk about investments and living in a foreign country, there's also the tax considerations of living overseas. Tax considerations are important. So for example, here in Korea and the United States has a reciprocity agreement to where you're not going to be doubly taxed. So in the United States, you're going to get federally taxed for whatever money that you make, and we're way overtaxed. But here in Korea, you're not going to get taxed for that same income. In other words, there's not going to be this double taxation. There are some retirement countries that have expat visas or retirement visas where you don't get taxed anything on your foreign income. There are other countries that will tax your income to, and it's not much of a tax, but it's still a tax nonetheless. So yeah, there are some things that you need to take into consideration and something to look into if you're seriously looking about retiring overseas. The one thing that kind of interested us was, when we got to Korea and we knew that we could retire here through the wife's ancestry of her being a Korean, and I would be able to attach to her with my visa, that we didn't really look into the taxation thing. So when when it was time for taxes, it's like, okay, well, we made the jump, we sold everything, we moved here. Then what are the tax considerations? So we started Googling and checking everything, and then that's when we found out that there's that no double taxation thing. But there might be some other things that if you're going to invest in properties in an overseas location and you're deriving income from a rental property, how is the country that you're retiring in, are they going to tax that? Is the United States going to tax some of those profits that you're getting from overseas of owning an investment property or maybe an Airbnb or, starting a business or whatever? Yeah, you need to consult a tax professional that deals with the tax system of that country and the United States. And from scouring the interwebs, what I found is that most expat or retiree-friendly retirement countries will have tax services that are done that will do your U.S. tax returns, and they'll also do any type of tax work for that country. So again, you don't want to be blindsided by saying, "Oh, wait a second, I got a bill for taxes, and what the heck is this?" It's better to know in advance what you're going to have to pay. But generally, it's not going to be too bad. One caveat: things change, and an example of that is Thailand, because I recently heard that there wasn't a lot of tax, and all of a sudden they changed it, and they're like, "Hey, basically, we've got a bunch of retirees and expats from other countries, and we're grateful that they're bringing in a ton of money with their pensions and buying stuff and renting and using everything. We're going to tax them." so they can change the tax laws. So don't think that when you go to a country that you're never going to be taxed on your income, because they might change the tax laws. So, and I think we're going to see more and more of that as we continue on. Let's go on to number 6. How accessible are shopping, dining, medical, and all of those things overseas in the country that you're planning to retire to? Now, an example that I see often on the interwebs and social media, YouTube, things like that, is you have the guy who's, he's in his 50s and maybe he retired early and he went to Thailand or Philippines and he's living out into the provinces. He's out in the sticks and there's nothing but dirt roads, and there's this shack and it looks like it could be built with, $100 from Home Depot materials. But you need to ask, how accessible is shopping? Where are the open air markets? What are the grocery stores like? Are there places where you can go out to eat? A more important question, what and where are the medical facilities? Now, some of those things might not be a big problem because I'll live out in the sticks in the provinces and it's no big deal. But then you get older and then you have some medical complications and you're not going to be as healthy then as you are now because everybody gets older. So if it takes you 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to get to a clinic or a hospital, how is that going to fare as you get older? What is the accessibility? Do you have to walk, take a taxi, take a bus, take a train just to get to a hospital? As far as handicap facilities or handicap accessibility of where you live, because you need to keep that in mind as well. What happens if I have a stroke or a heart attack or, I break something and I'm on crutches? Is living in the province and hobbling around in a wheelchair, on dirt roads, is that something that is really doable? There's people that have had to uproot their entire lives and they retired in a province or in that small out in the sticks woods area because it was so inexpensive. But then there's a medical situation that pops up and now they're on crutches or on their walker or they're in a wheelchair or they require regular treatment for whatever injury or disease or illness that they have and requires a lot of trips to a clinic or hospital. Now they have to move out of the sticks and closer to a medical facility. And generally, as you get older, I know none of us want to talk about this, but it's a thing. You definitely need to think that as you get older, something is going to go wrong, and you're going to need that medical attention. Do you want that medical attention to be close by, or do you want to, drive 6 hours to get to the hospital? Again, there are some things. Walkability. Are things easy to get to as far as just going out your door and walking to an open air market or coffee shops or dining or medical clinics? Or do you have to take a taxi or a bus or drive or motorbike or, and as you get older, what happens if you get in an accident on the motorbike and now you can't use the motorbike? And do you buy a car or, so walkability is very important. So for example, here in Korea, where we live in our apartment, right across the street, there's restaurants, there's cafes, a few minutes walk away. I'd probably say about 5, maybe 7 minutes away at the most if we're walking slow. They have open air markets, they have grocery stores, so walkability is definitely, it's not a bad thing here. It's pretty high. In other places, it might not be like that. Like you will see some places in Philippines or Thailand where you have this great place to live. It's a home, you got your own pool, you got your gardener, it's just brand spanking new. But you end up having to take a 10 or 15 minute taxi ride just to get to the grocery store or 20 minutes or more to get to a hospital. Is that something that you want to do? What about immigration? If you have to go to immigration offices or do some type of legal work, how close or how far away is that? Again, accessibility to all these things comes into play, and it's something you might want to think about. Next question, number 7, what is the process for buying or renting? This is a big one because, Usually, what we're used to in the United States is you put down a deposit and then you pay a monthly fee. And sometimes utilities are included, other times utilities need to be put in your name. How is the renting done? Well, in Korea and some other places, Korea sometimes you don't have a monthly rent that you can do because the majority of it is done with jeonse, which is a very large deposit, and then you live rent free in that property. And the amount of that large deposit can be anywhere from 50 to 75% of the price of that property. So depending on where you live, that can be a huge outlay of money. But for most retirement-friendly countries, you will find a monthly rent. So like in Malaysia, $200, $300, $400 a month. If you go to Thailand, $300, $400 a month is not uncommon compared to the United States. I mean, you can get a condo for $300, $400, $500 a month. One bedroom condo, you have a balcony, you have a pool, you have a gym, you have, all kinds of amenities nearby. It is really a great deal. And some of them include all the utilities. Some of them don't. So, yeah, renting, definitely take that into consideration. And, how that renting process goes. What are your rights as a renter? What are the rights of the landlord? Those are some things that you need to think of. Now, the big thing, buying property overseas. There are some countries where foreigners can buy property in the country that they're retiring in. So, for example, here in Korea, we bought the apartment that we live in. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath. It's about 1,600 square feet. Got a screaming good deal on it. We didn't want a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, but it was such a great deal we just couldn't pass it up, and we figured, we'll get a 3-2 smaller place a little bit later on, and we'll rent this place out. But what is the process for buying property? We're used to getting a realtor, getting a pre-qualification letter. We look for properties in the United States, and then we go, there's a title company, and then you go to closing, and you fill out a ton of paperwork, and boom, you buy the property. Inspections, the due diligence. How is it done overseas? Well, there's some countries where even though they're expat and retiree friendly, foreigners cannot buy property. So it might be that you have a leasehold where you can lease the property, but you don't own the land. So there are some countries where I think you can get a leasehold for like 20 or 30, 40, 50 years or whatever it is. And then you live there. And then obviously once you shed your mortar coil and pass on to the next world of whatever that is, then that property goes back to the landlord, and the landlord will be able to do whatever they want. But you have that leasehold. You need to know the legal requirements for leaseholds. For buying property, are you buying the property, or are you actually buying the land, or is it just a lease? Those are things that you need to know. And of course, there's corruption at every level. So you need to make sure that you have a good realtor, that you find a real good source, for any type of legal things that you do in a foreign country. And generally, kind of like what helped us is that the wife's family's here in Korea, so they were able to help us, hey, look for this type of realtor, this kind of high rating, and this is how the process goes. And it was really nice to have some locals explain to us the process of how to buy a property, and it is a little bit different than it was in the United States compared to here in Korea. So yeah, knowing the process is important, because when you don't know the process, you don't know what's going on. The stress goes high, the frustration. Also, what is this? I did not, and you don't understand things. And for something that's common for the locals, it's very uncommon for you, and that can be very stressful. So the more you know, it is important beforehand. Number 8, how do cultural differences impact daily life overseas? In the United States, this is not something that we really think about, because the majority of people speak English. We've been born and raised in the United States, and we know how to do banking. We know how to do shopping and transportation and this and that, and our entire life. And the cultural differences, which there's not a lot of cultural differences in the United States as we think about it until we go overseas and we see that there are different ways of doing things. So, for example, cultural differences could be language barriers. You know, that's probably the biggest thing right there. If you live in a foreign country and you're retired there, you might want to learn the local language or learn how to read and write. Other people aren't so, they're not apt to learning different languages, or you just get so old, you're just like, ugh, forget it, I'm done with learning, whatever it is, and that's okay. But now we have technology to help us out with that language barrier. So, there's apps on your phone, there's translation devices, and for a number of languages across the world. So in the past, you might have had to hire a translator to go open a bank account or ask questions at the grocery store, or when you go and use public transportation, or getting train tickets or bus tickets or taxis. You might have had to have things written down, and I want to go here and have somebody translate and write it down for you in that language. Now there's apps on our phones, and it makes life so much easier. So do you need to learn the local language? No, but it is nice because it will make your time a little bit easier. And the locals will appreciate that you're trying to learn the local language. So there's that. There are also, if you're concerned about that, which you should be, you should look for some community or expat resources. Some places or communities or networks will offer free language classes, like here in Korea. There's a number of places that will have free Korean classes. They'll have tours. Some of them will charge some money of, here's how you do shopping, and here's what you need to look for this and that. So it's kind of like a tour of how to live in the country that you're at. There are some other countries that I've noticed by doing a lot of reading and watching videos online, like in Thailand or Philippines, or even overseas, Portugal, South America, where you can hire drivers or you can hire somebody as guides through the city to help you out, renting a property, getting your groceries, and getting you all set up. And that's kind of a thing in some places. So think about that as well. It's all right to have somebody show you. And if you think, oh, well, I'm not going to do that, and because you're ashamed that you don't know the language, there's nothing wrong with getting help. So, and it can actually help you get acclimatized or adjusted to that new country quicker than not. Okay. The other thing we're going to talk about is, are there expat support communities? And we kind of touched on this a little bit. Some countries have great communities for expats and overseas retirees that come to those countries. There's entire neighborhoods where that neighborhood, even though they live in a foreign country, there's a lot of expats and a lot of foreigners that live there that you can, they have wiffle ball, they have sports, they have hiking programs, or they go together and do certain activities. So it really is an activity-oriented thing, and they can help you with, I need some help with, paying taxes, or, how do I do my utilities, or how do I get a cell phone, and other things like that. Other countries, the expat communities are not as, not as prevalent. Like here in Korea, there are some expats, but they're not really centrally localized, and there's not really active communities as there are like in the Philippines or what we've seen in Thailand. So if having a community of fellow expats like yourself from your country or other countries that speak the same language or English, then you might want to choose a country or take that into consideration when you choose a retirement destination. Is, do you want to live in an expat community where there's a lot of local foreigners, expats, or do you not mind being the only foreigner in the area that you're in? Again, and what are the support communities? Other support communities that you might not have thought about, like, for example, being married to a Korean. My wife is a naturalized U.S. citizen. we have a support community of our own, and that's the wife's family. So the wife's family's been awesome. Her brothers and especially their children that, when we got married and they were young and small, now they're grown up and married and so on and so forth. They have kids. They have helped us immensely as far as like, well, yeah, here's where you need to go for this. Here's, consider this. Oh, no, you want to go here for the best deals. Here's how you get cell phone service. To have some family of the country that you're in is definitely a benefit. So if you're in that type of situation, you automatically have a support community. Let's go on to the last one. What happens when I get older? Now, we touched on this a little bit. And there's a lot of different things that come into this. What happens as you get older? Well, we touched on where physically, eventually, you're going to get sick, you're going to get infirmed, bad things will happen to you medically unless you just die in your sleep peacefully, which would be really nice after decades and decades. But unfortunately, that's not the norm. And a lot of people come down with diseases and illnesses. Maybe they have to have surgery. It affects their mobility or their mental capacity. So the question is, what are the end of life situations? Are there, retirement homes? Are there assisted living facilities? What are the costs associated with that? Again, going back to the accessibility. If I'm infirmed and I'm in a wheelchair, or I can't walk for some reason, or I have limited walking, what is the accessibility for groceries, medical appointments, transportation, all of these things that we take for granted when we're younger? Assisted living facilities, how much does that cost? I know in the United States, my grandmother, who had passed away a while back, she was living in an assisted living facility, and it was $9,000 a month. That is insane. And that brings into question, what are your resources, and do you have enough in your budget or your retirement to cover that type of situation? So that's a valid question. Nobody likes to think about these things. We just want to think about, retire overseas, sit on the beach, drink Mai Tais, and we're good to go. We just want all the good stuff, but we don't want to think about the plan B and why we need to have plan B as we get older. But we really should. The other thing that happens when you get older, how is your will? Do you even have a will? Is it set up? How is the foreign country that you're in? How are they going to treat your resources, your bank accounts, the money that you leave to, your spouse or significant other or family members? How does that come into play if you're retired in an overseas location? And then ultimately, well, what's going to happen when you pass away, and what are the people going to do with your body? How is that going to be handled? And is there any costs associated with that? If you're by yourself, I guess it doesn't really matter, because if there's no one to leave your money to, you don't really care. And it's like, be damned, I'm gone anyway. But if you do have significant others or family members and you're trying to leave your estate to them, how is that going to be handled in an overseas retirement location? So that might require visiting a lawyer, getting some legal advice on, these end of life type things, and how, is there probate or, living will and trust, and are wills recognized from the United States, recognized in the foreign country that you're living? Those are some really good questions, and you need to dig into those things, especially as we get older, and we don't know when we're going to kick off. So yeah, it's a lot of different questions. Now comes the point of where we're going to get 5 bonus questions about Korea, and we're going to try to make these quick. What are some of the cultural differences of living in Korea? I would say the biggest one is that whenever you go into somebody's house, you take your shoes off at the front door. So usually, back in the old days, before you stepped into the house, you left your shoes outside. Now it's gone to the place of where you walk in through the front door, and you will have an area where people take off their shoes, and then you go into the house. So buy some socks. if you got holes in them so that you're kind of more presentable. There's there's a little bit of shame of when you go to somebody's house and you take your shoes off. And I remember the first time that this happened, and I was in the military and whatever, and I went, this friend invited me over to his family's house, and I had like two big gaping holes in my socks, and it was like I'm trying to cover the sock with the holes with my other foot, and it just looked really weird, and I was kind of embarrassed. But yeah, there's something to be said. That's kind of a big challenge. Eventually you get used to it, but yeah, that was one of the big cultural differences. The second big cultural difference was when you present something to somebody, especially if they're older, you use two hands. If you pour a drink for somebody, what you end up doing is using two hands and you pour that drink for somebody that's older. And that's deemed as a sign of respect. It's okay for an older person to pour a drink for somebody with one hand because they're older. It's just the way it is here. Some other things. There used to be this thing that when you were drinking, and we just had the Lunar New Year last night, and I know it's today, but we had it last night with the wife's family and everything because it was the one time when everybody could be there. So we did our celebration last night, and there are times when if somebody is really older than you or older than you, there was this thing that if I have my drink and it's time to cheers and toast, if somebody's older than me, then I would face away, and that's how you would drink. That's kind of an old school thing, especially if somebody is older and you don't know them, then it's respectful to do that. But with like my wife's family, and we've been together 34 years. I'm a keeper, I guess. And in some of those things now and I'm 57, so now I can drink, in front of people, and I don't have to turn or hide my mouth or whatever as I drink. But in some instances, at least a long time ago, that was a thing. Other cultural differences. I would say respect in public transportation is a big one. In the United States, if you go, and from what I've seen in my experience, if you go on buses or trains or things of that nature, trolleys or trams, that people are loud. They can be obnoxious. They will play music. They will talk on their phone, and they'll yell and scream and hoot and holler and whatever. Here in Korea, you get on a train and it is quiet. I mean, everybody is just kind of, it's almost unsettling when you come from the United States where you're used to a high level of noise, people yelling and screaming, and so you put your headphones on and your earbuds in and you just kind of block everything out. That's not needed here in Korea. So, for example, we take a train to go to some medical appointments up in Seoul. We took the train to go down to Busan to have some Hanu beef, and you get on the train and everybody is quiet. It is almost like you stepped into a church, and everybody's on this, you can't speak, and it's so quiet, it's almost unnerving. But yeah, that is a huge cultural difference as well. But as soon as you get off the train and you get into the train station, then everybody's shucking and jiving and moving and bumping into you. There's, especially during rush hour, there's not a lot of personal space like we have in the United States, unless you're like in New York or something like that. But yeah, that's kind of those are some cultural differences here. How does the cost of living in Korea compare to the U.S.? The cost of living here in Korea, at least where we live, which is not in Seoul, because Seoul is so expensive in regards to real estate. And then, of course, with real estate being more expensive, your cost of goods and services and dining out and so on is going to be a little bit more expensive than in cities that are definitely not Seoul. But what we have found is, we've cut our expenses in half, basically, and even more so. Let's see if I can bring up. Let me kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So, for example, what we end up see here is in southern Colorado, where we lived, versus Korea for rent and expenses. So in Colorado, for a place, you're looking at about $1,750 or $2,000 a month. Our mortgage was $850, but the caveat is we had a huge down payment that brought our monthly payment down. So you can see, compared to the rent and mortgage for a similar size property, is $490. Electricity was $125 a month in Colorado. Electricity, water, sewer, trash, and internet in our apartment, it's $130 a month altogether. So yeah, water, sewer in the United States was $65, trash was $25 a month, internet was $65 a month. Gas and heat in the United States, we were paying an average of $65 a month. Gas and heat, or the gas for the heat in Korea, was $24 a month. Property tax in Colorado was $140, $150 a month. Property taxes, basically, it's like $20, $25 a month here. So yeah, when you look at those expenses, we're spending at least $1,300 to $1,500 a month in the United States. It's even more now. It's been a couple of years. And then in Korea, it was like $665 a month. So yeah, expenses are, it's just kind of crazy. We did another comparison, a monthly. So for housing, if you're renting, and it was $2,000, you can see property tax is $165, electricity was $140 versus $40, $90 versus $65, water was $40 versus $10, trash was $20. It was free because it was included in the apartment. Internet in Colorado was $75 a month. Here in Korea, it was $15 for high speed. Cable TV was like $135 or more. For 250 channels of cable TV with some English channels is $15 a month. 2 cell phones in the United States, we were paying like $130, $140. Here in Korea, it's $80 for both phones. Car insurance in Colorado was about $115 a month. Here in Korea, it was the same, except we just had our first year and we're going over and renewing how many miles we drove. We got a huge discount. So our insurance now for our car is about half of what it was in the United States because we don't drive that much. So you get bigger discounts for not driving as much than you do in the United States. So, you can see the total there. There's a huge difference compared of the living expenses that we have in Korea versus the United States. What is the healthcare system like in Korea? Healthcare system in Korea is pretty good because of they have like a healthcare system where if you stay longer than 90 days, then you have to enroll in their healthcare system, which is about $110 a month. It's not transferable. So in other words, if you travel overseas, the Korean National Healthcare Insurance will not cover you overseas. You have to buy separate insurance. But it's basic care. It's pretty good. Healthcare system here in Korea is a little bit different than the United States, but overall it is generally good care and better quality care. I've never had any staff, nurse, receptionist, doctor give me any attitude whatsoever. They've gone out of their way to be professional and polite. It is just amazing. I think a lot of healthcare people who have attitudes need to wake up and be more like Korea. With that, there are some exceptions to healthcare. If you have your own healthcare insurance, you can do that, and that so that you don't have to buy the Korean national healthcare. Of course, it has to, have certain limits of care to qualify for an exemption here in Korea. But the healthcare system as a whole is really, really good. And the prices are way lower than what they are in the United States. Like I talked about before, there's medication that was like $700 a year. Here in Korea, it's like $40, $45 a year, exact same medication. So yeah, it's good. The only thing that I would say that was really different, if you go to a major hospital in Korea, like I had to go to Samsung Medical Center, which is one of the top 3 medical centers in Korea. And there is thousands of people that get seen in this place. And so their efficiency is on point. It's not like the United States where you show up and your appointment's at 2 o'clock and then you got to wait 45 minutes, and then you're in the little waiting room and you wait another 20 minutes for the doctor to see you. No, that's not it. I mean, when you have an appointment, you go check in at the nurse's station, you get your number, whatever, you sit down, and I think the longest I've ever had to wait is like 15 minutes. And then, boom, get seen, and you're out. Go see the doctor. I think the doctor was the longest one because they were backlogged a little bit. I think it was like 20 or 30 minutes. And the doctor apologized. Oh, we're so sorry for being late. We apologize. And it's like, wow, when has that ever happened in the United States? Never. So, yeah, the healthcare is a little different, but they have so many people that the care has to be blunt, straightforward, and to the point. There is no lollygagging around when we're talking about medical care in Korea because of the vast amount of patients that they have to see. My wife read an article about Korean doctors, and there's a shortage of doctors in Korea as a whole, and a lot of doctors want to be doctors in Seoul, but they don't want to be doctors in other cities because it's not Seoul. But as a whole, Korean doctors see about 75 to 100 patients a day. Yeah, so it's a little bit different. So as compared to the United States, in the United States, we have general practitioners that will pretty much cover all of your medical needs. Here in Korea, don't really have GPs. If you have a problem with mental health, you have to make an appointment with the mental health doctor. If you have pain problems with, your back, then you got to go see that doctor. If you have hormone problems, then you need to go see the endocrinologist. If you have, whatever it is you need to see that specialist, you don't have to go see a GP and you don't have to get a referral to go see that doctor. So that's kind of good. But getting refills for medications, you have to make appointments with each of those specialities if you need a refill for each of those. So that's a little bit different. That takes a little bit of getting used to. Number 4, what main challenges we faced in Korea? Yeah, this is, I think some of the biggest things that we faced here in Korea was just how things are done with banking, getting used to public transportation, which is, we're always used to driving and having vehicles. So if we wanted to go to the store, if we wanted to go to the big city or whatever it was, we just hop in our car and go. Well, before we had our car here in Korea, public transportation system is good, but it's just different than in the United States. And that's because we're so used to having our own cars and we weren't really used to public transportation. And then the whole thing of, back when we were in Korea a long, long time ago, you would go to the ticket booth and you would buy a ticket and then you would get on the bus or train or whatever it is and you would go to where you're going. Nowadays, it's more technologically advanced. And even though my wife reads, writes, and speaks Korean like nobody's business, because we've been away for so long, we don't know the apps to use on our phone to buy tickets. We don't know how to use the kiosk on buying tickets, and there is a thing. It's even for my wife, it's confusing because it's not something that we've ever done. And there's a lot of older Koreans here that are older than us that have problems because they don't know how to use the apps. They don't know how to use the digital kiosks and so on and so forth. And a lot of times you have to reserve tickets for train tickets and so on and so forth. If we have a doctor's appointment, I need to make sure that we reserve tickets a month in advance, and you can only do a month in advance for tickets. So the public transportation system, while it is very good, and it's not like if it's late, it's like 1 or 2 minutes late. That's been the most late I've seen a train be late. Which, compared to the United States, it's very different. But trying to get to medical appointments, trying to go to certain places, you have to plan in advance to do that because of so many people are using the public transportation system. It's almost like they need a bunch more trains. They need a bunch more buses. They need more when it comes to public transportation. So hopefully that will grow over time. What are some other challenges? The language, banking, and actually languages. This is on my wife's side because the Korean language has changed over time since we lived here in Korea last. There's certain nuances or phrases or slang or things like that that the wife just doesn't know because she hasn't been around it and she hasn't grown up in it. So there are some things to consider that if you're, like, for example, if you're married to a foreigner who's been away from their home country for decades and they come back, there's going to be some things that they don't know because of the change in the languages. Change in procedures and how you do things. We were used to doing American banking for, 30 some odd years. We come back to Korea and it's different. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to them because that's how they've been doing it their whole life. For us, it's like, this doesn't make sense, but you need to get used to it. But yeah, I'd say that's about the big challenges. In buying real estate is different. Banking, language nuances, and so on and so forth. And the last one for what final advice for those looking to retire in Korea? I would say be flexible. If you have done your homework, excuse me, if you have done your homework and you know your budget, you know your finances, you know how you're going to get here and what visas. For example, my wife has an F4 visa as a returning Korean. I'm an F1 that's kind of attached to her visa. And, you need to be flexible. Things are done differently. And if you don't know how those things are done differently, or you experience different things, or you haven't done them before, there's going to be a little bit of stress and frustration involved. And that will hit both you and your spouse. Even if your spouse is Korean, they will be frustrated as well, especially if they've been outside of Korea for a long time, for the reasons I stated. But yeah, there's a lot of different things to consider. I would say be flexible, especially if you're retired. There's no reason to get bent out of shape. For some of us who, like military or worked in law enforcement, high stress jobs, it's get it done now, get it done quick. And when it's not done or there's obstacles, we get really frustrated. And especially if you have PTSD, then it really just jacks that stress up a lot. But aside from that, just relax. There's no reason to get bent out of shape because remember, you're retired. If you're retired, you have time. Driving in Korea, you might make a wrong turn or whatever, go off in some other direction or hit the wrong exit. And usually guys get frustrated, and it just sends them through the roof. Just realize it's like, oh, okay, no big deal. I'm retired. I got time. I guess we'll just turn around, or the GPS will just find out some other way. But I think how to handle stress and deal with stress is something that is good for everybody. The final advice is also to set boundaries for family members, yourself, so on and so forth, because it's about you. It really is. It's about you and your family, and you need to protect you and yours. And if that means setting boundaries for foreigners or locals or, Korean family members or non-Korean family members, you need to set boundaries, and they need to be healthy boundaries. If you don't feel comfortable doing something, you're at the age where it's like, yeah, if you're retirement age, you can just tell them and say, hey, you know what? I'm not comfortable with this. Please understand I've been doing this for my entire life and I just don't feel comfortable doing this, or this. And because of whatever reasons, be open and honest. Another thing I would say is be open to trying different foods and just really kind of trying new things and to find out if you like them or not. The other thing I would say is final advice for people who are trying to retire in Korea like we did. Some people need a lot of friends. Some people need communities. Some people need groups or associations that they can go do activities with. And I think it's harder to do that here in Korea than in other countries. For me personally, I'm kind of a loner, even though, I was firearms instructor and in the military and just did all kinds of teaching and instructing things. I really have a very, very small circle of friends when I was in the United States. Here in Korea, basically don't have any friends. So I'm kind of good with that, but part of that comes from PTSD. But if it's really important to have a social circle, you're going to have to make that extra effort to develop those relationships here in Korea versus other countries where it seems to be easier because there's more groupings of expats and retirees in a location where people retire. Here in Korea, there are retirees, there's people like me and my wife, but there's not a cohesion amongst all of those retirees and people who have retired in Korea to where it's like, hey, well, let's get together, let's do this and do that. There is some of that, but it's not as big as what I've seen in other countries. So if you need to have a social type of environment, realize you're going to have to put some more time and effort into that than with other countries. But basically, yeah, just take it day by day, have a plan, do something for health and fitness to better your life for the long run. Stay communicating. If you're frustrated, communicate that to your spouse. Have time where you talk and speak and listen. And just basically, the big thing is it's going to be all right. There's going to be frustration. There's going to be stress. There's going to be times where you don't want to look at the other person or they don't want to look at you. That's the time of when you should be supportive the most. Because really, that's all you have is you and your significant other. And in times of stress and frustration, there's times where you need your space, but then there's also times where you need to support that other person during those times of stress and say, hey, it's going to be all right. We'll get through this. It's a bump in the road. Worst case scenario, kind of like what we said is, worst case scenario, we'll go to Thailand or, some other place that is, more retirement friendly if this doesn't pan out here in Korea. We're definitely not going to go back to the States, that's for sure. You can't afford that. So anyway, that's what we got going on. And hopefully these questions about overseas retirement as a whole and the 5 bonus questions of here in Korea, that will be something that you can think about when you talk about retiring overseas or considering it, or if you're in a situation like us. So yeah, questions, comments, tips, suggestions. If something that I said is wrong, like recently, I found out through a viewer that said with an F4 visa, my spouse can actually work in Korea. Me as an F1 visa holder, which is attached to hers because I'm the spouse, I cannot work in Korea. So yeah, and before I said you couldn't work on the F1 or the F4 visa, and a viewer told me about that, and it's like, oh, okay, and then I verified it. It's trust but verify. So yeah, if there's something I said is wrong and you can show me where that's at, I would love that correction. I would love that constructive criticism, and I appreciate that because this whole thing of being retired overseas and retired in Korea is to help minimize the learning curve for people that are looking to do the same thing. So, and that requires, laws change, things change, or there's misunderstandings. And we want to minimize frustration and stress, and that's kind of like why we're doing these videos. So anyway, that's what we got going on. Comment, like, subscribe, the whole deal. And Lord willing, we'll see you on the next video. Peace. Good stuff. Oh yeah, Happy New Year too.